Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Rewire Your Brain 2.0, 5 Healthy Factors to a Better Life, 2nd edition, by John B. Arden, Ph.D., ABPP, narrated by Paul Heitsch. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Limit of liability, disclaimer of warranty. Although the publisher and author have used their best efforts in preparing this book, they make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this book, and specifically disclaim any implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales representatives or written sales materials. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for your situation. You should consult with a professional where appropriate. Neither the publisher nor author shall be liable for any loss of profit or any other commercial damages, including but not limited to special, incidental, consequential, or other damages. Preface to the 2nd edition. Since the first publication of this book, there have been exciting advances in fields of research that were once assumed irrelevant to the brain and mental health in general. Not only has research in the fields of psychology and neuroscience combined to offer new practical insights about how to improve your brain and mental health, but also the fields of metabolism, epigenetics, and immunology have revolutionized our understanding. This book brings together the practical insights from all these fields and explains how you can apply them to your life. This book is a non-technical companion to my book Mind, Brain, Gene. Whereas that book addresses how the developments in neuroscience, epigenetics, and immunology can be applied to therapy, Rewire Your Brain 2.0 is meant to be a down-to-earth book for the general public that describes how to change your brain based on well-researched principles that work. For more neuroscientific detail, I have added that information separate from the general narrative. Overall, this book will guide you through the process of rewiring your brain so that you can change how you think and feel for the better. Each chapter explains key insights from new developments in all these sciences and describes how to apply them to specific areas of your life to help you thrive. I have tried to keep the technical terminology to a minimum, but there are some terms and concepts that are worth remembering. In Chapter 1, you'll learn about the major discoveries that explain how to rewire your brain. You'll learn how habits are formed, how to increase good habits, and how to stop bad ones. Your brain is always developing new connections between brain cells, called neurons, and killing off the old ones that are not being used. You'll learn how to make new connections that promote good habits and shut off those that support bad habits. These brain changes have been described cells that fire together wire together, and cells that fire out of sync lose their link. You'll learn to use the acronym FEED to help you remember the steps to rewire your brain. The mnemonic stands for focus, effort, effortlessness, and determination. By practicing these steps, you can feed and make the rewiring changes described in the rest of the book. You cannot rewire your brain without producing and utilizing energy efficiently. To understand how this works, in Chapter 2 you will learn about your metabolism and the indispensable energy factories in each of your cells. You will learn that your DNA is not your destiny. Your genes are, of course, critical, but the emerging science of epigenetics has shown that genes can be turned on and off with self-care and positive behavior change. You will also learn about how your immune system, and especially chronic inflammation, has a profound negative effect on your brain. The exciting field of psychoneuroimmunology, which stands for the links between your mind, brain, and immune system, will be explained, and there will be suggestions for achieving mental health. We all feel a little anxious or down in the dumps at times. You'll learn how to reframe these feelings to feel more positive. In Chapter 3, you'll learn about a part of your brain called the amygdala that can detect threat and is sometimes turned on when there is actually just the perception of threat. Since your amygdala can trigger these kinds of false alarms, you will learn how to keep it in check with another part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. You'll also learn about the balance between your sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, which one becomes excited when need be, and which one helps you to calm down afterward. Also, I'll explain an evidence-based practice called exposure, which turns off a false alarm so you may approach life courageously and with vitality. In Chapter 4, you'll learn how withdrawing from the world can worsen sadness and depression. The underactivation of the left prefrontal cortex, PFC, and overactivation of the right PFC are associated with depression. In contrast, activation of the left PFC, which is associated with taking action, contributes to the alleviation of depression and the promotion of positive feelings. I will explain how the techniques of behavioral activation and cognitive restructuring can shift your brain activity to your left PFC. You'll learn how chronic inflammation is strongly linked with depression and problems with thinking clearly. Also, I'll explain how full-spectrum light affects your biochemistry and your mood. You'll learn how to stay positive and enjoy life with an optimistic attitude. The next 5 chapters will describe the lifestyle practices that have received the most consistent research toward brain health. They are encoded in the mnemonic SEEDS, which stands for social, exercise, education, diet, and sleep. You'll also learn how these healthy habits enhance your brain's longevity and how to maximize a vibrant life free of self-imposed limitations. The SEEDS factors form the foundation and prerequisite for brain health. In Chapter 5, specifically, you'll learn how people who maintain positive social relationships live longer and feel more satisfied with their lives, and about the brain networks that thrive on social support. I'll describe how these networks help to build healthy relationships and the empathy critical for your mental health. In Chapter 6, you'll learn that exercise plays an indispensable role in how your brain rewires and creates new neurons. Exercise is one of the most powerful ways to jumpstart the neurochemistry of neuroplasticity, and one of the best antidepressants and anti-anxiety techniques that you have immediately available to you. This essential behavior can stimulate neurogenesis, which is a process that can actually grow new neurons in your brain. In Chapter 7, you'll hear how education harnesses your memory skills by wiring together as you learn. Various memory techniques have been used for the last 2,000 years, and you can refashion them to enhance your memory capacity. You'll learn mnemonic devices to make your memory skills work optimally, and how education builds what we call cognitive reserve to build added connections between neurons that act like a reserve. In Chapter 8, you'll learn how a healthy diet ensures that your brain creates the right fuel for your energy factories. Your diet also provides the biochemistry for making your brain cells communicate with one another so that you can be calm, energized, and focused. In addition to consuming the right amino acids, vitamins, and minerals through your diet, you'll need the correct essential fatty acids to ensure that your cell membranes are supple and flexible enough to enable neuroplasticity. In Chapter 9, You'll learn how sleep plays a central role in brain maintenance. You spend 1/3 of your life asleep, and the quality of your sleep determines your health and longevity. You will learn how to achieve a healthy sleep cycle and what the stages of sleep do for your brain. There are stages that help to encode memory, boost your immune system, and wash your brain clean of toxins. In the next part of the book, specifically in Chapter 10, you'll learn what factors increase your resilience and, despite obstacles, allow you to approach life with a can-do attitude. Research in the field of positive psychology illuminates the role of optimism and healthy ambition and offers antidotes to the narcissistic and material focus that is endemic in contemporary society. In addition, the practice of compassion and non-attachment helps to alleviate needless tension and suffering. Since there are always bumps on the road of life, resiliency and openness will allow you to rewire your brain to be flexible and accepting of the rich complexity of life. Bonus chapter explains how your mind is composed of states of mind that emerge from networks in your brain. When these states of mind are balanced, you can enjoy mental health. You'll also learn about the calming yet vitalizing role of non-judgmental attention, your prefrontal cortex, and an accepting attitude. The subtle power of parasympathetic meditation can increase your tolerance of stress and your sense of peace. You'll learn how to increase your ability to be mindfully present and to maintain a sense of connectivity with others and the world around you to thrive. Part 1. Healthy Brain and Body. 1. Your adaptive brain. A revolution is occurring in many sciences, such as neuroscience, epigenetics, immunology, and psychology, to reveal how you can rewire your brain. Since the first edition of this book, new insights have illuminated how your mind, brain, genome, metabolism, and immune system need to be in sync for your well-being. This book brings all this new knowledge together in a down-to-earth manner and explains how to apply it to your daily life and how to get better control of your thoughts and emotions. It was once incorrectly assumed that the brain you were born with was hardwired to function in predetermined ways dictated by your genes. Your brain is not hardwired. Rather, it is softwired by experience and how well you take care of it. Neuroscientific research has revealed that the brain is quite plastic. If you think you are stuck with a brain that tortures you with anxiety and depression, you are not. The brain you were born with is modified by your experiences throughout your life and is changing all the time. Neither is your behavior or emotions rigidly determined by your genes. Genes lay out potential vulnerabilities, but they do not dictate your thoughts, your feelings, or your behavior. You can even turn genes on or off by your self-care behaviors. It was also erroneously believed that all the brain cells you had at birth would be the only ones you would ever possess. The possibility of developing new neurons was thought to be ridiculous. In fact, when I was first studying neuropsychology, my professor said, "You have as many neurons as you will ever have the day you were born. Then you lose 10,000 a day." Yet it turns out that you can grow new neurons in specific areas of your brain under certain conditions. This phenomenon is called neurogenesis. These discoveries shed light on how you can maximize your potential and minimize your vulnerabilities. This book describes how to apply the findings from these fields to rewire your brain so that you can feel calm and positive. By learning these skills, you can improve your ability to focus, face challenges, reach your goals, and yes, even be happy. You can learn to feel less tense, less anxious, and less easily stressed. There are parts of your brain that, when not tamed, tend to overreact and add to needless tension, anxiety, and stress. This book will describe how to get those parts rewired and work for you, not against you. The bottom line is this: how you train yourself to think, feel, and take care of yourself on a regular basis will rewire your brain and allow you to be calm, positive, and focused. This process of rewiring your brain is not merely a taming of parts that are overactivated, but also activating the parts that are not. For example, there are parts of your brain that thrive on taking action, and when you do take action, you are more likely to enjoy positive feelings. On the other hand, when you sit back passively and wait for positive feelings to emerge, parts of your brain become overactive to promote anxiety and depression. Thanks to new discoveries, we now know much more about how the brain works and how you can rewire the parts of it that are out of balance with the others. Think of this book as a manual for a brain tune-up. You will learn to tune in to the areas that have become either underactivated or overactivated when you feel down in the dumps, lose your optimism, and only look at the dark side. I will describe how to activate the parts of your brain that must be balanced so you feel positive about your life and see the glass as at least half full. You'll learn to calm down in the face of stress and boost your mood when you're down. You'll also learn to improve your memory, have better relationships, and get a good night's sleep, all of which rewire your brain and thus enable you to be calmer and feel more positive. Nurtured nature. To rewire your brain, the first thing you need to understand is that your brain changes as you adapt to the world around you. Most importantly, you can change how you feel and think. We have moved far away from the old debate about nature versus nurture, and we now know that you are able to nurture your nature. Since your brain is not hardwired and is instead softwired, your experience and behavior play major roles in modifying your nature. In other words, you change your brain by what you do. Figure 1.1. Your brain weighs just 3.5 pounds, yet it's one of the most advanced organs on the planet. According to the last good count, it has 86 billion brain cells, called neurons, and 1 trillion glial cells. That's more than the number of stars in our galaxy. All these cells are social, meaning that they need to be activated to stay alive. What you do, how you think, and how you take care of yourself changes your brain, just as muscles change when you exercise them. Your brain cells communicate with one another all the time. Most of this communication takes place in the gaps between your neurons, called synapses. Figure 1.2. Since they are not hardwired but instead are softwired, new synapses are made when you learn a new skill. This is called synaptic plasticity, or neuroplasticity, which you can remember as a rewiring of your brain. Because the synapses between your neurons are modifiable, you can acquire new skills and talents, such as how to speak a new language, play the piano, or read. When you repeatedly do something, like ride a bicycle, you use the synaptic connections that support that skill, and, in turn, you strengthen those connections. When you let the skill lie dormant, you weaken those connections. It's similar to atrophy and the way your muscles weaken if you stop exercising. In this very real sense, your brain is a use-it-or-lose-it organ. The mantra, "cells that fire together, wire together," aptly describes the way your neurons make new synaptic connections so that you can learn new skills. The more you do something in a particular way, such as how to speak a new language, ride a bicycle, or play a piano, the more the neurons fire together and wire together to make it happen again with more ease. Repetition and practice strengthen those synaptic connections. The more the neurons fire together, the more likely it is that they will fire together in the future. A saying that describes the opposite effect is, neurons that fire apart wire apart. Or you could say that neurons that are out of sync lose their link, which is the neural explanation for why you forget things. This can happen when you forget to feel anxious or depressed in a certain situation that previously made you anxious or depressed. I use the words "made you" very lightly because situations do not make you feel this way. They are bad habits that you can break. More about this in chapters 3 and 4. The more you do something, the more likely it is that you will do it again in the future. That's why baseball players go to batting practice, golfers go to driving ranges, and piano players practice for hours on end. The same goes for thinking. The more you think about your Aunt Alice, the more she will pop into your mind again and again. That's what studying for exams is all about. Repetition rewires your brain and grooms habits. When preparing for a final exam, you can earn a higher score by studying early and often. Neuroplasticity makes learning how to be positive possible and how to deal with stress effectively. In fact, if your brain is really hardwired and you were depressed, you would be stuck for life. But this is not true. You are not doomed to suffer. Learning something new is rewiring the brain. By making new connections between thoughts and feelings, you make new synapses between the neurons that encode those ideas and images. LTP versus LTD. Another way to describe the way neuroplasticity works is by the long-term potentiation, LTP, that occurs when the excitation between cells is prolonged tends to increase the potential for them to fire together again more easily. This sensitizes and strengthens the connections between the cells to make them more likely to fire together in the future. Thus, LTP promotes long-lasting affinity between neurons by reconfiguring their electrochemical relationship. On the sending side of the synapse, the stores of the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate become stronger, while the receptor side of the synapse reconfigures to receive more of it. The voltage on the receptor side becomes stronger in its resting state, which attracts more glutamate. If the firing between those neurons continues, the genes within the neurons turn on to construct more building blocks for the synapse, which strengthens its activity. Just as the brain needs the LTP mechanisms that strengthen the connections between neurons so that you can improve your memory and learn new skills, it also needs mechanisms that will help it to forget. A process known as long-term depression, LTD, helps you break bad habits. Note, LTD has nothing to do with the emotional state called depression. LTD helps you weaken the connections between the neurons that support an old bad habit, like anxious feelings and depressive thinking. This is what is meant by the saying, cells that fire out of sync lose their link. When neurons fire together often, they begin to fire together at a quicker rate. They do not require as much energy as before when you were first learning the skill. This leads to increased efficiency because there is more precision in the number of neurons that are recruited to do that skill. For example, when you learn to ride a bicycle, you use muscles and neurons that had not yet been linked. As you begin to link them when learning to ride, at first you try to avoid wobbling and falling over. Then, once you learn to ride with ease, less effort is required, and your ride becomes much smoother and faster. The neurons required to fire with their partners have teamed up and wired together. As you become more talented at a specific skill, a great amount of space in your brain is devoted to making that skill possible. For example, Alvaro Pascual-Leon of Harvard Medical School used measured regional cerebral blood flow with positron emission tomography, PET, to measure specific areas of the cortex. He studied people who are blind who read Braille and found that the neuronal networks associated with their reading fingers were larger than the networks for their other fingers and for the fingers of readers who can see. In other words, the sensitivity of their reading fingers involved more connections, which used more space. This means that practice enhances neuroplasticity that creates extra space devoted to that skill in your brain. In another example of how the brain rewires, musicians who play string instruments, such as the violin, were examined to see if their brains had reorganized to accommodate more space. There tends to be little difference between the musicians and the non-musicians in how much space was made available for the fingers of the right hand. However, the area of the brain devoted to the fingers of the left hand showed a dramatic difference because they must be nimble and dexterous to make all the fingering movements. The brain space devoted to the fingers involved in fingering was significantly greater in these musicians than in non-musicians. This difference was greatest if the musician had started playing the instrument before the age of 12. In other words, although this use-dependent neuroplasticity occurs during adulthood, it is more dramatic the earlier and the longer that the person plays the instrument. To understand how neuroplasticity works, consider that the age at which you learn a language affects whether you speak with an accent. If you learn a new language while in your 20s, it's highly probable that you will speak that new language with an accent from your first language. If you learn a new language before age 9, however, you probably won't have an accent tinged by your first language. When you learn a new language as an adult, the neurons that have always connected to make specific sounds tend to continue to fire together, even when you try to make different but related sounds. For example, if your first language is German, and now you are learning English, you may have trouble with the sounds found at the beginning of the words wish and this, because with sounds don't exist in German. You may therefore pronounce them instead as V and Z, which are similar sounds that occur in German. People who speak Japanese often have trouble with the English R and L sounds. The more you speak to people who don't share your accent, the greater the chance that your accent will fade. For example, both my parents grew up in the Boston area, and a few years after I was born, my family moved to California. My parents gradually lost most of their Bostonian accents as they spoke with people who had moved west from all over the country and with people who had grown up in California. Not only does your behavior rewire your brain, just thinking about or imagining behaviors also can change your brain structure if you repeat those thoughts enough. For example, researchers have shown that simply imagining a session of piano practice contributes to neuroplasticity in the area of the brain associated with the finger movements of playing the piano. Essentially, mental practice contributes to the rewiring of the brain. Of course, mental practice is what studying for an exam is all about. But imagining piano lessons without the finger movements is not as effective as with the finger movements. You get the point. Mental practice establishes new connections and strengthens them. The bottom line is that repeating a particular behavior strengthens the synaptic connections that make that behavior possible, and not repeating it weakens the connections. To break a habit, your task is to not strengthen it by repeating it. Eventually, it will fade. The less you repeat anxious and depressive thoughts and behaviors, the less they will automatically plague you in the future. Chapters 3 and 4 offer methods to specifically eliminate anxiety and depression. The point here is that cells that fire out of sync lose their link. Neurogenesis. One of the important players in both neuroplasticity and neurogenesis is a growth substance called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?